Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, welcome back to the Order, and today, yes, we're going back to another Who is Deadliest. Now, this is with the second video on the first season of Deadliest Warrior, and that is with the Vikings versus Samurai. Now, I want to put this out here. This is going to probably get a lot of people probably angry at the channel, but I had to explain to y'all, we had to do a lot of research into this and to understand it. Now, not just me, but even Thrand actually does agree with this. In fact, he has a couple hundred videos on, well, this subject, especially with the Viking versus Samurai. And I had to agree with a lot with him in his earlier videos. In fact, the Metatron has also released a video a little while ago, which I'll leave the links down below if any of y'all need to see them. Now, I wanted to explain to y'all, Deadliest Warrior, when it came out with this episode, it got a lot wrong. One is a major factor and reason we have to understand that the arms and armor that they were using, for example, the samurai equipment that we saw in the series or the episode itself was actually somewhere between the 16th and 17th century, while the Viking was somewhere between the 8th and 11th century. So, what does that mean? It means a lot. It means that they gave the samurai equipment and armor, that of which they would have not have used at the time. In fact, I have to explain to y'all, the samurai we see is of the late samurai, when we should be seeing the samurai of the Heian period. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that in any way, but yeah, it's pronounced of the Heian period. And in doing so, we can understand that they would have actually used a different type of armor. However, I'll get to that very soon. Now, first, let's take a look on the weapons and armor that were used in the series. One would actually be, for the Viking, would be the great axe, as they call it, the long sword, which no, that's not a long sword, spear, and shield. Now, with the armor, they used metal and helmets. So that's about it, unless you count the shield also with it. For the samurai, they actually had the, well, as I stated, the 15th to the 17th century style armor, that of which was, well, the light style plate armor that the samurai were known to have used. This style of armor was known to have been used during the timeline when samurais had firearms. Yeah, that's right, firearms. In other words, that's a major difference. So this has to be really realized in history books, that we have to get that straight out. Now, the weapons they used for the samurai were the katana, naginata, the yumi bow, and the kanabo. Now, that's a major thing we have to understand. They only used 4 weapons for the Vikings and 4 weapons for the samurai, which in truth is not historically accurate at all. For one major point in history, we have to understand that the Vikings used a lot more than just a few weapons. In fact, the same can also be said about their armor. Now, I hear many of you already saying, Templar, this kind of sounds a little idiotic and such. Well, actually, you gotta understand, we gotta understand the historical armor that they would have used. For example, you've pretty much already seen me do a video on the idiocy on Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for example, which was really bad in many forms with the arms and armor and such and all that. Well, that's kind of the same with this. For example, the historical style Viking would have majorly, a lot of them would have actually worn a type of outfit known as jerkins. And jerkins are technically a winter coat, if you want to put it at that. And this is where we have to understand. The historical style type coat like this would have been thick enough and strong enough that of which it would be near identical to an early gambeson, meaning it would have technically absorbed the shock blows of a sword, especially that of a katana. And as well, we also got to understand that, yes, some Vikings would have afforded to buy mail, or they could have taken it from their dead enemy, if they could have. The same can also be said as for helms and shields and such. However, shield bosses were taken. But I want to put this out here. In the entire series, the only time I see him use the armor especially for the Viking is 1 of 3 times, and they're not using the entire gel body or whatever that they're wanting to use it on. They're just using it once, and that's about it. For example, I could actually, with the katana versus the mail, it's actually stated that the mail failed against the said mail armor, which is true because one is the fact that we have to understand the mail armor, even budded mail, for example, which is Asian style armor, or mail armor at this point. It could not even, the katana can't even cut through that. So we gotta understand that what might happen if it's riveted mail, kind of obvious. It's not gonna go through. Now, precisely to the point also with the fact on the shield, for example, the shield they use in the Deadliest Warrior episode, it looks like as though it has a metal rim, something like this. That's a decoration piece, but no, it feels light, yes, this is how light they would have been, but no, it would have had rawhide in order for that self-protection. And I want to put this out here. They didn't even show a katana go up against, well, one of these bad boys. Because, one, I could actually see the katana sword probably getting stuck right in the middle. So, that's a good example. Another type of point I could also explain, though, with the Viking armor, also, they also showed the Yumibo go up against, well, a type of helmet. And here's the thing. They shot him in the eyes, yes, but the thing is, here's the thing. Imagine me wearing my helmet, and guess what? I'm lifting up my shield, and you kind of don't realize this, but I'm going to end up lifting up the shield just for self-protection. He's not going to end up staying there and taking the blow. Which, yeah, Vikings would have used shields. Now, samurais would have used shields also, but not like what you might think. They would have used it mainly for archery combat, which was, well, how they were meant to be used as. These were stationary. These weren't type of shields you could carry around mostly. You could carry them and just place them down, kind of like European-style light shields, as we see in history for crossbowmen, but this is a little different. One, you can't wield this around. Now, I want to put this out here. The design system on the entirety of the said series, apparently when it came up to them going up against each other, the Great Axe won and the sword for the Vikings won. But for the samurai, the said, I want to say, Yumibo and the Kanabo won. So here's what I want to put out here, y'all. The armor and such and the specialists, yeah, I call them specialists with this plural term, meaning I don't think these guys really are, because some of the arms and armor that they're wearing and talking about does not make any sense, especially how the katana was used. In fact, diamond hard blade. Now, no, these are jeweled steel. Jeweled steel, yes, it's good steel, but the reason is it's not pure steel. Pure steel for katanas, here's the thing. Jeweled steel had a major problem. It's if you, well, you can easily snap it. Which, yeah, that was the major problem about it. For Vikings, on the hand, they used a type of carbon alloy steel. Carbon alloy was somewhat of a spring steel. And here's the thing. If that, and none of y'all know what that means, it means the sword won't break or bend like a sax would, which is a little different. Now, I'm just getting into the historical type form of all they got wrong, in which, yeah, they got a lot of things wrong in this. Now, I want to put this also out here with the type of axe they were using. The axes I saw in there were somewhat not historical to how a medieval Viking axe would have looked like. Now, I want to put this also out here. Yes, if you were to wear a Japanese-style helmet, you're pretty much probably going to get your head cleaved in, or worse, you're going to in the process have internal bleeding through the brain, which even with a Japanese-style helm, that's a major problem. Now, first let's go also now into what historical arms and armor would the Vikings wear, or use? Well, one, let's take a look at the armor. They would have used, as I said, the jerkin. They would also use mail, which would be a little bit of a mixed variety. The same could also be some helms, shields, and including laminar. Laminar is, or Viking laminar, is slightly different. It technically only well, was meant to cover a certain point of the body, and only the most wealthiest could have afforded it. But you can see the problem with this. Now, though, Vikings would not always all pretty much own this. Only certain Vikings. Now, I want to put this up that we're only going to have 5-on-5 with this entire matchup. Meaning we're going to have the poor class Vikings, the medium class Vikings, and then the high class Viking, like a king or whatever. Now, the term Viking is a term meaning to go raiding, meaning to go a Viking. So it doesn't mean I'm a Viking. That's this kind of idiotic. Now, we're also going to do this with the same with the samurai, in which we're going to have different classes of samurai. You know, if now you'll know the class system on the samurai we're going to have to go with, we're going to go with the Heian period, in which these guys would have actually been wearing laminar armor. Laminar, or Japanese-style laminar, is slightly different, and is incredible. In fact, I don't know why. I love this type of time period of the samurai. They look a lot more beautiful, more badass looking. But yeah. Now, I also want to put out here the weapons that we're going to use for the Vikings are pretty much the broadsword, yes, or the average Viking sword, the sax, or seax, as well the Viking bow, or longbow, as many people pronounce it, and which is technically just a bow, if you think about it. As well, we're also going to look at the axe, and including the great axe. Now, what you might know here, maybe already, what's the difference? Well, one, the great axe, or Dane axe, was technically big enough up to my shoulders, while a regular axe, well, it was just a one-handed axe, or sometimes a two-handed axe, depending. The same can also be said about the spear, which we are also going to be using. The same can, then we'll also go with the javelin, and as well a throwing axe. Yes, a throwing axe. I'll tell you more about that later. And then we're also going to go with the mace. Now, for the samurai weapons, we are going to go sail with the sword. Katana is one of them, but there are a lot of other samurai swords out there, such as the Tanto, I believe it was called, which is before the Katana. And then we're also going to go with the Yumi bow against, well, other bow. Then there is also going to be the Naginata, which is technically a pole weapon, or a halberd. I don't know why. I always call this a Japanese halberd. And then we're also going to have the Kanabo as well. Another weapon could also be the Ono, which is a Japanese-style axe. Now, this is what I want to put out here, y'all. The Japanese-style axe is a lot different because, well, this is technically the Japanese-style Dane axe in history. Now, they did have smaller versions, so yeah. I can still see this somewhat working for the Japanese, maybe. So it's a 50-50 on this point. Now, then we also got the Yari, which is a spear. This is technically a Japanese-style pole spear, which is meant for thrusting capability to stop cavalry. And then we also go with the Tanto, Dagger, which, so, yeah. There is a lot of this we had to understand in a historical meaning and scripts and such. But the historical form we have to understand is that the Vikings would have fought differently than what we think. For example, there are many tacticians that don't realize this in history books. Now, I want to put this out here. We also have to follow the type of form in history of their, well, major forms. And actually, when I did the major Richter scale, apparently there was a major tie 3 times. This was actually with the Dagger and CX of the Japanese and the Viking. There would also be the Spear and Yari. And as well, there would also be the Mace and Shield combo against the Kanabo. Which, yes, let me actually first get this down the way, shall we? Okay, first, let's take a look at the sword. Now, what are the 2 varieties? Well, in the series of Deadliest Warrior, and especially in the episode, they actually stated that the broadsword for the Viking was deadlier than the katana. And the fact is, it actually was about to cut off the head. The only thing that stopped it was the said metal bar that was holding the head in place. Now, that's as good as a good explanation. So if the bar got shipped, just imagine what might happen if that Viking sword could easily just cut through the head. And in the middle of the episode, we actually do see him when he does a thrust through the neck. It actually does a spring steel type form, which that gives us a good explanation on the said sword. In fact, Viking swords were only the higher class versions, if you could afford them and such, could actually do that. Now, Viking swords or broadswords were incredibly beautiful and incredibly dangerous, and these were one-handed style swords, I might add, and these are devastating cutting weapons for good, also for thrusting, depending on how it tapers. Now, this katana, though, it's actually the same size on the sword on the Vikings. In other words, around 36 inches and such. So just imagine on a two-handed version of a sword compared to a one-handed version that does it slightly better. See, it's kind of no difference. Now, I hear many of you already, but Templar, this doesn't make any sense. It is a great weapon. The katana is perfect. It is flawless. There's no problem about it. Actually, many historians in Japan actually state there are many problems about this weapon. For certain, it can't exactly hit it can hit certain weapons, and the problem is it's not a perfect weapon at all. In fact, the supposed 3-body or 4-body or 10-body blade, and no, that's non-existent. That is Hollywood. You don't listen to Hollywood. One major reason why is the fact that the katana has been known to shatter, especially incredibly quickly as soon as it goes through a spinal cord. So, yeah, if it gets a chip and such in the blade, you can see why that the sword would no longer be workable. So we gotta understand that the sword we have to give to the Vikings. Now, I hear many of my viewers and such already hate typing, like, oh, you're wrong. Oh, really? Here's the thing. Go take a look at many of the links I'll leave down below on many historians on Japanese culture that actually talk on why the katana can't face off against European weapons. In fact, a famous YouTube or history channel, back before it turned into idiot shows, actually had a show called Warriors with Terry Schappert, and this was a former Green Beret, and he did both the Vikings and the Samurai, which I'll leave links down below for that. And he even asked them, and they actually even told him on the problems with a said katana. It had to be manufactured in a certain way for it to be created. Now, many of you might start saying, but Templar, the katana, it's beautiful. Yeah, just because you love a katana from many movies and such doesn't mean it's accurate to reality. In fact, Hollywood gets this wrong a lot, especially with firearms, so think that part through. Now, I want to explain to y'all that the katana itself, it has to use extremely, well, its type of metal quality is not like that of European metal quality. In fact, Vikings use a type of bog iron. Now, bog iron is very, well, bad, but the thing is, it's kind of made the same type of way as you would think of a samurai sword. How so? Well, for one, they have to keep folding the steel in order to make it a perfect type of sword. So, however, this is steely iron, and however, Vikings were somewhat known to have used incredible great swords also in history. So, yeah, this is why I still have to give it the sword and shield combo to the Viking, because of the fact he's using a shield and a sword on the battlefield, facing off against a samurai using a two-handed weapon in his full Lamellar armor. And one good thrust into the armpit, for example, and that's game over. While the katana is going to have to try and cut through mail, which is impossible. So, yeah. Now, let's now go into the said dagger. Well, one or knife or whatever you want to call this, I just call it the dagger combo. So it would be the sax versus the tanto. Now, the tanto is a great weapon, but only meant for, well, suicide. And it's actually stated that many samurai would only use it as a last-ditch effort to commit suicide before their opponent could kill them. Which, it's kind of weird in samurai tradition. I don't know why. This is just some old samurai handbook on martial arts that they would have done with. However, there was a way and a type of form of combat training to perfectly kill an opponent by grabbing his type of arm by this hand, gripping him closely just to use the dagger, and then to steal his own katana as soon as he died. It's kind of a type of tactic I would agree with. However, the Vikings also had the same tactic. So this is a little different. In fact, Terry Schappert himself had also done a little bit of a fight scene with one of the said Viking reenactors. And as well, the Viking reenactor, what they did, they had two shields, both Terry Schappert and the Viking reenactor had both their shields, and they clashed up against each other. And this was on a deck of a boat, for example, or a ship. And guess what? The Viking was just pressing down, and what he then did later is that as soon as Terry Schappert had his arm in the air, for example, the reenactor grabbed his arm, pulled him down, and then pulled out his sax. So, yeah, Vikings had their own type of grapple system as well. So I had to give this a tie, though, because of the fact on how they were used in manufacturing and warfare. However, the sax has been known to become a long sax in historical style warfare. So behind a shield combo, it might still somewhat work. So it's 50-50. Okay, now the bow. The bow, this is where it gets a little hard to explain because many people will say of how great the bow is for the Japanese. No, the bow for the Japanese is horrible. Now, I hear many of you already, Templar, why would you say this? It's a great bow. Yeah, it's great for Asian-style warfare. But going up against a European power, for example, like the Vikings, that'd be like trying to technically take a kitty toy to a gunfight. You see my point? In fact, Viking-style armor and equipment was manufactured in a type of way to stop certain weapons, especially mail. Now, many of you might wonder, what do I mean by this? Mail can easily be punctured? No! It cannot. Mail cannot be easily punctured. In fact, riveted mail has been known to stop certain weapons. It's butted mail that can easily be punctured, ladies and gentlemen. One major reason why is the fact that if the ring isn't riveted, like say this, like say my fingers like this, which imagine these are butted rings, guess what? I could easily just pull them apart. Like nothing. The same could be said about many, well, on how Japanese-style weapons could easily destroy their own mail. Now, Japanese or Asian mail armor was always butted, and of which was known to have gone in the armpits and such, and here and there. So, what would be the difference? Well, I have actually talked with the archers from the Sherwood Forest group, like from one of our Highland games, and they explained to me on how bad the Yumi bow was. It was perfect for cavalry-style warfare, but comparing it to a longbow like the Vikings might have used, not the best idea. One major reason why is because of the arrowheads. In fact, these are European-style arrowheads. These are Japanese-style arrowheads. Now, let this sink in. Does this look weird to anybody but me? Anybody else? No? Well, I gotta tell you one thing. The European-style arrowheads were actually meant to puncture through armor. In fact, especially mail. In fact, these are bodkin tips, for example. Elongated bodkin tips, or needle-nose bodkin tips, were known to pierce through mail and gambeson combination. Meaning, if it can get through that, just imagine what could happen to a samurai wearing laminar armor. And laminar was meant to stop Asian-style arrows, for example, which, if none of y'all know what Asian-style arrowheads looked like, Asian-style arrowheads looked, well, technically with this elongated tang, which was meant to go into the said arrow shaft. Now, that actually gives us a major problem, because since it has that narrow iron tip, guess what's going to happen? As soon as it impacts something, it's probably going to break. And I've actually seen CNP of all, it's a YouTube channel. They actually tested this on laminar armor in the East with Mongolian bows. And this is actually a good example on how accurate this is to this. So what might happen if a longbow hit them? Kind of obvious. Longbows were manufactured in a type of way to actually skewer through some certain armor. Not medieval plate armor like the Europeans had, but plate armor like laminar, yes. It could easily go through it. The same with scale armor. So just imagine what might happen if you get skewered with a bodkin tip. Bodkin tips were meant to destroy earlier plate armor, such as this type of stuff, armor. So I don't see a samurai probably winning this unless he has his cavalry style warfare. So that type of idea we got to put into play. So Europeans still win this one. Now another one could also be the axe. Now I had to get this one into play because the Ono is technically a different style of axe, such as the great axe to the two-handed to the one-handed and such for the Japanese. However, the Vikings also had their own variation. Now, I wanted to put this as a tie, but I have to explain to y'all, Viking-style axes were somewhat incredibly dangerous, especially also with the shield and axe combination. Because just imagine this. I'm going to use my Viking shield to stop his axe from coming down on me. As soon as he comes down at me with it, I can easily just push it off to the side, then hack at him. Or get him to the leg. Which, Vikings had different design axe heads. There was the bearded axe, there was the hatchet axe, there was the Francisca, which is a throwing axe, which we'll get to very soon. And as well, there are also other type of variations. And in fact, the Dane axe is a good example. The Dane axe is a good, pretty much a dangerous style, two-handed weapon. However, Vikings were also known to have hammers sometimes on the back end of their axes to hit through the said helmet. In fact, many historical helmets during the, I want to say, 1300s, give or take, were still, it's actually stated that they got hit and impacted by certain axe heads with hammers on the back. So that gives us a good explanation. In fact, at the Battle of Visby, it's actually stated, or the Battle of Gotland, as some people pronounce it, it's actually stated that many of the Visby defenders or the Gotland militia had actually used the same type of historical axes their ancestors would have used during the Viking period. So we gotta put that point in history. Now, I want to put this out here. When you get hit by a Viking axe, it's like getting hit by a freight train. And as well, they also explain that in the, episode of Deadliest Warrior. And even the Japanese-style helmet could not stop the said axe head. So, we gotta understand, if a Japanese Imperial Samurai could have probably faced off against this guy, I don't see him probably living through another second. So, we gotta give the, rank to the Viking again. Now, let's now go to the spear. This is another tie. Reason being that the fact that the Viking spear, I wanted to give this one a major advantage over it, because the fact is the Viking spear had winged tips, or in this case, boarhead spears. Now, in the series of Deadliest Warrior with that episode, they showed the guy throwing a boarhead spear. Yeah, no. You don't throw a boarhead spear. Boarhead spears were meant to stop certain type of, forces from going all the way. In fact, he should have used is a javelin, which is a huge difference. So we gotta understand the Viking historical arms and armor. There have been a huge difference. Now, Vikings did throw spears, but they were known as javelins. So, yeah, you gotta understand there's a huge difference between the two. So, what about that type of form with the type of spears? Well, I had to put this one at a tie because they are incredibly gruesome, but the Japanese type of Yari spear was known to actually be incredibly light and effective, and was known to sometimes be used with two hands, meaning it doesn't matter if you have a shield, it's going to be kind of a little difficult, especially if he goes for your legs. So the samurai can somewhat probably win at this point. However, not so much. Now, I also want to put out here, we're also going to go to the armor. Now, the armor that of which we actually understand in the said video of Deadliest Warrior, they only showed certain arms and armor. However, the Vikings were known to have worn multiple types of armor. For example, there were the regular armor that regular infantry would have probably used, and as well there was pretty much the, every civilian or every type of Viking raider would have always worn a helmet. Now, only a few would have actually been able to afford mail and laminar, so that's what we got to put into play. Now, with the type of form in history, we do have to understand that every one of them would have held a shield. And the fact is, only the higher-ups could have been able to afford laminar and mail, So that's where we got to put it. Now, even though this kind of makes it a little hard, you gotta understand the samurai don't see probably winning with this type of fight. So, yeah, this is where it's gonna get harder and harder for the samurai to probably beat the said Viking. And since the samurai pretty much had laminar armor, and as well the regular foot soldiers hardly had any helmets, so I don't see a said samurai probably winning this fight. That's a little tough. Now, then let's go over to the kanabo and shield and mace combination. Now, with the Viking, I can somewhat see the shield and mace combo probably working. Problem is, Vikings would have hardly used maces at the time. And as well, this is what I find a little hilarious. Sometimes, actually, what the Vikings would have done, they would have thrown the said mace, not hid behind it. However, this is where I actually have to give the kanabo a major point. One to the fact is, with the kanabo, you could easily use two hands to destroy a certain person, but the Viking could also just, well, throw that said mace at the person because the samurai is not expecting him to do that when he then starts to charge up and bash into him. And as soon as he does that and he gets him on the ground, he's just going to keep bashing him with the shield. However, the samurai is probably going to do the same thing. So, why do I have to put this at a tie? Kind of obvious. It's kind of hard to defeat a certain Viking when they have this certain weapons and armor. The same could also be said about the samurai. So, this is where it kind of got a little hard. Now, another type of one I want to put out here is also the naginata. Now, this is where the samurai does take king, since it's technically the halberd of the said samurai warrior. And in fact, the samurai would have actually used a naginata in a type of form of slicing said motion. However, is it a great weapon? Yes, but I don't see it going through mail. So in truth, I can see it going hitting the legs, the arteries of the neck. That's about it. But anything else, and it's not going to work. So it does take a keen point in. However, let's also take a look at the tactics. Now, the tactics of the Viking were incredibly different compared to the samurai. How so? Now you'll know what samurai warfare looked like. Samurai warfare during the time of the Heian period, they were known to have used major armies in order to push forward and destroy, which is kind of how they kept evolving their military. However, there were certain type of points in history that they had to evolve with. And somehow the same tactic somehow still worked. But the Vikings, on the other hand, they used a different style of warfare. They would have used hit and run tactics, and as well they would have hit in the weak spots of a greater army. For example, say like I have 2,000 soldiers compared to only 100, like about like 1,000 Vikings, or actually like I see only a force of 100 Vikings. Guess what? I think, oh, I'm going to easily defeat these guys. Next thing I know, another 1,000 come back around and trap me and attack me from the rear. And in doing so, I'm pretty much been outflanked and I am totally destroyed. So that's kind of how we have to understand on how the said Vikings had to fight. So, what does this prove? It proves a lot, really. The term and use of the said weapons and warfare of the said samurai and Viking, the tactics would definitely go to the Vikings, seeing as though they know how to hit and run and use a type of form of attacking the weak points of their opponent. So, I don't see the said samurai probably getting out of that one. Now, then we also got to go to the throwing weapons. Now, many of you might start saying, Templar, what do you mean by throwing weapons? Kind of obvious. The samurai were known to have used some throwing weapons. Some of them were known as the, I want to say, well, throwing stars, as I always call them. These were ninja-type weapons. However, they originated with the samurai, and these were mainly meant for distraction. And here's the thing. If you throw yeah, in fact, many times over, samurai were known to have used these to distract their opponent, not to kill them. So in other words, it could fly right at you and you're just meant to deflect it. Guess what? That guy's going to end up getting right close to you. However, Viking said weapons were also meant to do that, but they were also meant to do harm. One major example of this could be with the mace when it's being thrown at you. Another could also be with the said throwing axe, which the throwing axe, or the Francisca, was known to bounce off the ground and over shields into human brains. So just imagine that also. And also with the javelin. Since the Vikings have a little bit more in variety, I somewhat see this working, especially with their tactics. Especially when they can outflank their opponent and throw it in the unprotected region. In other words, right from behind them and destroy their fortifications and their front lines. So, what is the ranking system of this? Who would technically win? Well, it's Vikings 6 out of 10 and the Samurai 1 out of 10. So, yeah. Now, I do have to put it out here that the Kanabo, I would have given the Samurai a 2 out of 10, and in which could actually have helped them out. However, that's the major point. That would have only been 2 out of 10, while the Viking would have still gotten 6 out of 10. Now, I didn't include the spear because I still wanted to give the Samurai a little bit of a chance, but it still didn't work. So we understand the true winner of this would always be the Viking. And this is 5 on 5, so let's just put this out. Like there would be 5 Samurai and 5 Vikings. Now, we could probably have like 2 Mainders, well, how should I put this? 2 small ranked type of recruits. In other words, these guys are less outfitted with armor. Then we have 2 type of military warriors, and then we have the champions. So let's put that into play. Let's first start off with the 2 guys in the said lower ranks. What would their armor be? Well, for the Vikings, it would mostly just be a jerkin and a helmet, and as well a shield. So that's about it. Now their weapons would also be a spear, sax, and an axe. So yeah, that's a good example. As well, they could have also used a bow. So we'll give one of them a bow also, so yeah. However, with that bow, he might not be able to use his shield, so, but we gotta understand on how they would have used it. Now, the fact is, we can also then go to the samurai. Now, what would their lower ranks be? Well, for their lower ranks, they wouldn't exactly get a sword, because only the sword could be afforded by the most wealthiest elite. But they could still use the said, Yari type of spear, and including the Tanto dagger, and even also the said Japanese Yumibo. Now, I could also see him somewhat using also the Ono and the Naginata. So either one of those weapons would be perfect. So let's see. We could have one of them using a said Yari spear and a said dagger, along with a said Ono, while one of the others uses a Naginata and a said, bow, while also wearing just a type of, vest Lamellar. So how would this work? Well, let's see with these 2 type of warriors. One to the fact, I could actually see the bow from the Viking getting through the said armor, but also the same could also might be said with the Japanese style bow against the said jerkin. So it might be a 50-50 on that. However, if it came to close range battle, I don't see this probably ending well for the said samurai. For one major example, both of these said Vikings might be able to outflank and kill their opponent, especially with the shields. One could keep one at bay, while the other could come to the side and kill him. Now, even though this to the nature form, he could easily use the great axe on them. So that could still work. Now, what about with the said, higher ups? Well, the Viking would the higher up Vikings would have been on mail, jerkin, and a helmet, along with their shields. And they would have been able to afford a sword, and as well might have been used a great axe. So that could be a good example. And as well, maybe throwing axes also against the said samurai who were using swords, bow, the such and such. So you know my point. But I can still see the Vikings winning no matter what. And this is just a slaughterville for the said samurai. I can see him killing like 1 or 2, but especially the lower ranked. But as soon as they get up to fighting the said higher up Vikings, I don't see the said samurai probably winning this. So, yeah. So pretty much the only two of the Vikings that would have died would probably have been the first two up until they get to the last three, which I could probably only see like two dying after the samurai probably lose 3 or 4 of their guys, and the final Viking would pretty much win. So, yeah, Viking still wins this hands down. But, yeah, this is kind of a sad story to say, but yeah, Deadliest Warrior was never truly accurate at all with anything. So, I just want to put this out here, y'all. This is desk from the analysis of history we have to understand. So, if a Viking could defeat a samurai, they actually could in many ways. So, just putting this out here, we have to understand this before we start to mislead people. Like, well, this series Deadliest Warrior did. Now, maybe you might start saying, Templar, you're wrong, the samurai armor is supreme, yada yada yada. Here's the thing, you gotta look up the armor before you start saying that. In fact, I used to believe the samurai were invincible great warriors, but the thing is, there's a huge difference between each timeline. In fact, we gotta look deeper at the Heian period, which gives us a good example. So, yeah, I'm sorry y'all, but you gotta understand. So, in truth, the Vikings win this hands down. But if any of y'all have any other ideas on how it could have ended up, please let me know in the comments below. Also, if any of y'all want me to cover any type of warriors in history, especially from Deadliest Warrior and such, please let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to get to them very soon, because I am doing a list from the original Deadliest Warrior up until we're soon pretty much done with that. Then we'll pretty much go out with our own versions, which, yeah, that's what I pretty much want to do, especially. But we gotta understand, this we have to fix before it gets too late. Now, I am somewhat serious and very curious on doing one with the knight versus the samurai, especially of the late period knight versus the late period samurai, which are both near identical with the type of armor and weaponry. So, it might be extremely awesome to see that one. Don't get me wrong. And now, before you all start saying, Templar, there's no way that could have ever happened. Well, that's Deadliest Warrior for you. It could have never happened with the Vikings versus Samurais. Not that we know of, because we don't really know in history, but we do know trade links were incredibly all the way from Scandinavia to Asia, and there actually have been jade Buddhist statues or necklaces that have actually been found in Scandinavia. So, yeah. Now, though, I just want to put this out here, y'all. If any of y'all have any ideas, please let me know down in the comments below. Also, please like and subscribe for more notifications. Also, just click that bell button. And also check out our Facebook for more notifications on other videos that are soon to come up. Anyways, guys, it's been Templar, and have a great day.